Today, we're going to be answering the age-old question, is water wet? So, many people have asked themselves this question and asked others this question, is water wet? Well, water makes things wet, but is water itself wet? Well, today, I'm going to try to answer that question. But first, we're going to start with a very similar question. Are things on fire, or is fire on things? It's easy to say, hey, that thing is on fire, but is it really on fire, or is fire on that thing? Usually when I'm answering questions like this, I like to define what is actually what we're talking about. Let's actually define what it means. If we're able to define what it is we're talking about, what it actually means, then it's a lot easier to answer these questions and probably easier for you guys to understand as well. Fire is an oxidation of material by an exothermic chemical reaction of combustion. What does that mean? That's talking a bunch of sciencey fancy terms, but we're going to say it in a little bit easier terms, using firewood as an example. So when you throw a log into the fire, the log catching on fire or the log burning is actually just the heat of the fire causing flammable gas to release from the inside of the log, which then catches on fire. And when the wood then turns black and turns into charcoal, that is just whatever solids is remaining of the wood after all of the gas has been released from the log. Gas that's released from the log when it gets really hot is either mixing with the cold air so rapidly, cooling it down so rapidly that it turns into smoke and the smoke just floats away, or the gas is staying hot long enough to just continue to burn. So we're talking a bunch of fancy talk, but let's answer the question. Is fire on things, or are things on fire? Well, the answer is actually neither. To give a conclusive answer, the log is not technically on fire, but the fire is also not technically on the log. The fire is actually on the gas that is released from the log. So if I were to set this thing on fire, technically it wouldn't be on fire, the air would be on fire. And that's kind of hard to believe, but that's how the science works. So my answer is neither. This wood would not be on fire, and the fire would also not be on the wood. The fire would be on the air. Specifically the flammable gas molecules that are in the air, but I'm just saying in the air just to simplify it up a little bit. I know that one was a little bit hard to understand, and that was one of my first questions that I've ever had where I had to answer it a little bit more scientifically, but I mean, that's kind of how you have to answer a question like that. This next question, on the other hand, is not really scientific at all. It's actually quite the opposite. Are we slowly living, or are we slowly dying? I've heard this question many of times from many different people, and I can understand both thought processes of this question. The first group of people think, well, we're all gonna die eventually, so that means that every single day that we're living, we're one step closer to death, meaning that we're just slowly dying. But the other group of people are saying that you live every single day. Every single day that you wake up, your heart is beating, your brain is working, you're alive. Assuming that you die of natural causes, that's just what I'm gonna assume because it makes the most sense here, but I can understand both thought processes. I mean, someone who thinks, well, we're all gonna die eventually, so every step that we're taking, every breath that we breathe, every day that we're alive is just 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 second closer to death. But the other side of people believe that if we're gonna die in approximately 75 years, that's 75 years of living, baby. I'm slowly living until I eventually die. Depending on your conclusion, it kind of just comes down to what your mindset about life is. And honestly, I believe that if you're constantly thinking about the day that you're going to die, or you're just drudging your way through life until you eventually have to perish, you know, you're probably more likely to just be depressed or sad. If you're constantly thinking about how eventually you're just gonna die, I mean, that's pretty sad and pretty depressing to think about all the time. To me, it's a much better way of living to think that you have so many more days ahead of you. Every day that you live is not meaningless, it's 100% meaningful. If you live your life thinking that you're just living and you can live every single day, you can make every single day better than the last day. You could have more fun tomorrow than you had yesterday. You could learn more tomorrow than you did yesterday. You could become a better person tomorrow than you were yesterday. So to me, I believe that both of these thought processes make sense, but I think that you're going to live a much happier, more fulfilling life if you believe that you're slowly living instead of slowly dying. If you believe that you can live every single day better than you lived yesterday, and you're just living to live, and you're living to have fun, and you're living to be a good person and to learn more, you're probably going to be a much better and more happier person than someone who's just constantly thinking that they're just going to die eventually. You could think whatever you want to think, but I want to be a happy person and not a sad person, so I believe that I am slowly living and not slowly dying. Okay, we're getting to the main event. The final question of today's video: is water wet? So by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this question was asked by Krista Brown. If you guys have any questions for me, put them in the comments down below on this video, and I'll try to answer them as honestly as I possibly can in a future video. But anyways, let's get back to the topic at hand. Is water wet? So again, just like the fire question and like many other questions, in order to answer this question effectively and accurately, I think we have to define what the word water means and what the word wet means. By definition, wet means saturated or covered in some sort of liquid. So if you take a towel and you soak it in a bucket of water, the towel is now wet because it's saturated with water, and your hand is also now wet because it's covered in water. Now, like I said, I think we also need to define what water means. So water means H2O, one hydrogen molecule and two oxygen molecules.
Strike that. Reverse it. Thank you.
Water, being a liquid, is a bunch of water molecules, which, like I said, is the H2O, all together in one space. Now that we've got the definitions of water and wet out of the way, let's go back to the towel example. So the towel is wet because it's saturated with some sort of liquid, in this case water, and your hand is also wet because it's covered in some sort of liquid, in this case water. I've heard people make the example that if wet means saturated or covered with some sort of liquid, in this case water, then water by definition would technically be wet. By that way of thinking, I would like to ask this question: if you add more water molecules to more water molecules, does that make the water more wet? Well, to me, I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. If you add water to a cup of water, it doesn't make the water more wet, it's just water. So just based on definitions alone, you can't cover or saturate water with more water because it is just water. In order for something to be wet, like I said, it has to be either saturated or covered in some sort of liquid, in this case water, and you can't saturate or cover water in more water. Therefore, to answer the question, is water wet, the answer would be no. Water is not wet. So Krista, I hope that answered your question. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that my answers were good enough for all of these questions. And again, if you guys have any questions, put them in the comments down below and I'll try to answer them as honestly as I possibly can in a future video. Hey bird. But anyway, that's about it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.